We have an ongoing series of events under the Reinventing banner, which have been going on since the far distant misty days of 2018. They're focused really on being a complement to the more traditional forms of research and convening that happen at the House. And they're focused on creative and lateral approaches to climate change and action. Previous events have looked at issues like reinventing buildings, reinventing plastic bottles, reinventing sneakers. Tonight's event is reinventing movies, climate change, and the power of culture. Hopefully that is the event that you thought you were arriving at this evening. Before we introduce our fantastic panel this morning, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and also talk a little bit about the theme for this evening's talk. I think for those of us who work within the climate sector, it's often really easy to focus on the big moments as signifiers of change or the lack of it. You know, the COP events, the G20s, where international policies and decisions are formed. At the Accelerator, we understand the importance of those moments, but I think we're also really interested in the broader processes of change that surround these moments, the shifts in values and mindsets that really create the context in which policies are formed, and also the concrete and practical actions that are taken by individual institutions, companies, sectors, and communities. And that really, I think, is the focus that I would like us to explore and discuss this evening. We'll be thinking both about some of the practical ways that the film and TV industry has responded to climate change, but I'd also like us to be thinking about how culture and film looking forward can reshape the cultural imaginary. What is the role that film and TV can make in helping to shape our values and our collective understanding, both in terms of what is needed, but also what is possible over the coming years? A few housekeeping notes before we get started. So tonight is going to be an evening in two parts. We're going to have a facilitated chaired discussion for the first hour or so. At that point, we will break for a drink, but not only a drink, there will also be popcorn, and there will also be opportunities for or I guess lightly structured conversations around some key topics. Tonight, there is no fire drill planned, so if you do hear a fire alarm, this is not a drill, this is not a movie, this is a real fire. I'd ask you to congregate at the fire exit on this side or this side, and representatives from the House will take you up onto the street. And finally, tonight is at Chatham House, but it is not an event that's being taken place under the Chatham House rule. There are some rules. If you could please refrain from releasing fireworks from under your seats or bursting into spontaneous renditions of the latest Taylor Swift Eras tour, that would be fantastic. There are some rules, but the Chatham House rule is not in effect. And what that means is we would really encourage you to share, post, link, and celebrate all of the great content you're going to hear this evening. And with that, I'm going to introduce my fantastic panel. I think we're genuinely really excited to have such a sort of caliber of creative and thinker and just players, I guess, from the industry on stage. Directly to my left, Fenty Balogun, climate activist and actor, with roles in major movies like Dune, TV productions like I May Destroy You, as well as his own, I guess, rich series of scripted performances with folks like Complicité on stage. Chitai, multi-talented director and producer, founder of Conquer, the production house, which when I look at the spread of, just to give you a sense of the spread of movies that come out from within Conquer, on one hand we have Raging Grace, which is a horror movie about the consequences and the characteristics of colonialism. We can switch from that to a sort of child-friendly parable about the potential for rewilding. So a great sort of spread of movies, as well as when she's not busy making those, also helping to author major reports on inclusion and representation within the industry. Lucy Stone, director of Climate Spring, that kind of seething ball of energy and creativity, looking at how we can explore new narratives within the film and industry for climate change. And Catherine Ellis, the head of climate content at BAFTA, which describes itself as the home of environmental sustainability for the screen industries, and also a key kind of, I guess, agent for change in some of the really exciting initiatives we've seen over the last few years. Before we get going, I know they haven't done anything yet, but they are going to be fantastic. So can you please help me by welcoming them to the stage with a round of applause? Thank you. So the way this is going to work is Fenty is actually going to start with an opening remark that is a more kind of structured series of remarks. We'll then follow with a brief response to a couple of prompts from me going down the line. We'll then have about 10 minutes of Q&A from the chair, and then we'll open it up to the room. So please, as we go through, if any topics come to mind, please log them. There definitely will be time to discuss. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage over to Fenty.
My mic, can you have 1, 2? That's good, that's good, that's good. Okay, black screen, very good. Hi. My name is Fenty. You can say hi back, that's good, isn't it? Hi. Yeah, great. We all know each other, we're all friends. So, although we would love you to take pictures and share things, this actually, embargo, NDA, don't share with anybody. This is a talk that has yet to be released. And when I knew I was going to do this, and we were talking about what we were going to speak tonight, I thought it would be perfect to share with you. Yeah, it is sort of a love letter to my sibling, as you'll see, but is also very real and true to my life. So without further ado, again, I introduce myself. Hi. Hi. Yeah, love that. My name is Fenty Balogun. I am an actor, co-founder of the Green Rider campaign, which is an initiative for actors to use their contractual agreements, riders, to help negotiate for cleaner sets and cleaner productions. And most importantly, for this event right now at Chatham House, I am an older brother. Growing up, it was me, my mum, and my sibling, just the three of us. Now, in these kind of situations, big brothers have a bit more responsibility. You look out for them, you cook for them, you pick them up from school, you give them advice, you tell them not to play with fire, and then they start making their own money and pay for fire spinning lessons. I've always had responsibilities with my family. So when the local election came along, it was my responsibility to make sure everyone remembers to... There we go. All WhatsApp groups lit up with my face. Don't forget to vote. I text my sibling, this isn't a joke, don't forget to vote. They say they will, I check up later, they don't. Now the big brother part of me is gearing up. Don't be too heavy-handed, because I'm sure there's a reason, but be heavy-handed enough that T, my sibling, doesn't repeat them. I go in with the, come on, man, I thought we were good. T wasn't registered in the right place, etc., etc. Apologies, left, right, and centre. I could have stopped there, but I'm the big brother, remember? I got to give it a little bit of vim, you know? Lock the lesson in, you know? I'm not angry, T. I'm just disappointed. I feel like you know how politically engaged I am and you barely take it up with me. I've got information for... I'm here. Now, I think my sibling had a moment of clarity, actually, because they looked at me with such clear eyes and said, I quite literally have no idea what's going on anything. There's always a war and a crisis, and you may not like this, but I'm working all the time and I still can't afford Am I allowed to swear? Shit. So when can I engage? Well, none of these people represent me or are honestly interesting. What is the point of me investing when they're all corrupt anyways? That's not true, I burst out and say. Well, that's the general consensus. They lie and nothing changes. It's been like this for ages. I'm looking for the right words to fix this feeling that my sibling is having right now, but I can't. Because I realise we're not talking about voting, really, at all. We're talking about powerlessness. Who here has ever felt powerless at a point in time? Yeah, look around, we're all the same. It's an interesting feeling, right? It's like being stuck. It's infantilizing, unable to move forward, and so you just cope. You get angry in other ways. You move forward. I get it. The feeling that nothing I do or feel changes the world that I live in. I look outside my window and I see it is flooding, torrentially raining, ever changing, because a moment ago it was the year's hottest day. And I remember it wasn't always like this. This is climate crisis. Ooh, the thing we all know. The monster we can't slay. More extreme weather, 4 seasons in a month, a week, a day. And food gets more expensive because it's harder to grow, and that leaks into the class system, because if you find it hard to afford food now, just imagine where that could go. This is a reality that people who grew up like me and T will have to know. And then there's this idea that all of that is separate to me. That whatever injustices exist, I still have to pay my rent, buy food, and find some way to be happy. Keep my head down and carry on, right? Whilst at the same time, our government approves new oil fields that they already have investments in, hold tight, RISI, RIP, and pass new laws that criminalise protesting or boycotting or anything that might actually hold them accountable for anything, of course T feels powerless. We are disempowered by this idea that it is all inescapable, that this structure of oppression is too big to take on, and so we just get on. But what if that's just it? What if, and go with me with this for a second, what if we work with this idea that that structure is inescapable and too big to take on? Because that must mean that that structure exists in every other part of our lives as a smaller version of itself. For instance, our working environments. Perhaps, if I'm able to transform that slice of that structure I deal with on a daily, maybe, just maybe, I'm able to transform the whole. I'm an actor. I love my job. However, the way the industry is run is inexplicably part of this system that we feel is inescapable. Many people, overworked, underpaid, made to feel lucky. The lowest paid, most neglected, intersected with racism, sexism, ableism, classism, and on. It includes the set builders, costume and makeup teams, riggers, ADs, runners swerving on the road in the middle of the night, hazy, exhausted. Or the excessive material waste and emissions, providing the conditions for the average film to emit twice as much as Brighton does in a month. Mad. By transforming this part of that structure I have access to, maybe, just maybe, I do something more. Just a year ago, Danusha Samore, Will Attenborough, and myself, members of Equity, our acting union, launched the Green Rider campaign. We took an existing rider made by BAFTA Albert, the leading sustainability group in film and television, and we asked for more. Trains, not planes, get diesel out. A facilitated communication between each department so they actually know what we're talking about. You see, we found that the industry culture makes other departments think that lead actors shouldn't be bothered with climate issues or justice issues, and day players, well, they're too worried to ask about any of it. Agents negotiate the best deal for their clients, which often means exclusive cars, trailers, flights, etc., which sets the agenda that my worth is equated to how much I consume. I now think you only care about me if I'm the biggest dick in the room. But a rider's aim is culture change. So instead of my status being measured by how much I consume, what if it was about the leadership and kindness I show? Just imagine if those principles bled into that greater system we feel oppressed by, that stuff just wouldn't go. We launched the open letter along with the rider, signed by over 100 established actors. We then piloted the rider with 5 major productions and 3 short films, and in some instances, this was the first time there was direct communication between each department, including actors who had previously been left out, to talk about radical sustainability. What can be achieved, and if it can't, how do we get there? Because it's not about being perfect. It is about changing as much as we can. Because the collective, collaborative power to ask for more is incalculable. And this is the bit where I talk to my sibling and I say, I'm sorry. I'm saying this is a very long-winded apology. I say, I'm sorry that no one told you about this bit. I'm sorry, T, that you felt disillusioned because it seems like the system doesn't work, and the truth is it doesn't work. And the thing that I think is worse is I do what many people often do with people they love, and I try and make you what you're not. I can't make you feel driven to change what you've been given. It's strange to think I should when I know that you're not done. There's a process to this all. We have to grieve. Grieve the idea that all the things we were promised about our lives, by our governments, by our societies, isn't what actually happens. We have to allow that grief for the next phase. But wherever you are on your journey, I would like you to take a moment and look at me. I represent Equity for a Green New Deal. I represent the Green Rider campaign. I represent every campaign I've ever been a part of. I represent someone who came from where me and T came from, with no money, no power, and no idea how they were going to have an effect on this world. And I want you to look at what we've done. Look at how big we dream. Because I promise you, if there is something you want to do, something you want to change, there are people who are and have been doing that work. And I talk to T when I say this: when you are angry enough, when you are tired of it, when you are ready to take your power, we are waiting. Because we need everyone, everywhere, all at once. Because a lot of the time, it doesn't happen unless you make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Fenty. Fenty, you spoke there about transforming the part of the system that you have access to and changing as much as we can. And I'd like to almost go along the panel just to take that conversation and think about the different ways that the different parts you have access to. Catherine, I'm going to start with you, I'll then come to Lucy and then to Chi. Sure. Catherine, so I'd like us for a moment, if you can, to step back and talk a little bit about how the film and TV industry's relationship to climate change has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. What are some of the kind of key highlights and dynamics that you've seen?
So I think it has changed quite significantly in the last 5 years. So Albert, BAFTA Albert, is the leading sort of sustainability organisation for TV and film. So we've worked to help make TV and film as sustainable as possible, and also to help support climate content, so supporting storylines about climate change. And over the last year, we've been going for 13 years, but for the last, for most of that, we've worked with TV. And then more recently, we've partnered with the BFI and are working with film to do exactly the same thing, both on screen and off screen. And in terms of it changing, so at COP26, BAFTA Albert helped convene 12 of the leading broadcasters and streamers in the UK, and mainly the UK, but also some international ones, to come up with the Climate Content Pledge, which is basically a commitment to support climate content and to get it on screen. So I think there's a real recognition that TV and film has a lot of power. We're in people's lounges every single day. We're in their rooms. We can talk to them directly. In 22, it was estimated that people watch 2.5 hours of TV every single day. The UK, we're notoriously known for watching more cookery shows than we spend actually cooking. It has a huge impact, and we've got loads of examples of how TV can affect change. So that It's a Sin, I don't know if you've seen it, Russell T Davies. After that, the numbers of HIV testing doubled. Cheers is often well cited as being the instigator of the designated driver. So basically it sort of coined the phrase and constantly talked about it, so it became a thing that people did, and it reduced the number of drunk driving incidents in the US. Succession, for example, I don't know if you've seen that as well, but with the great storyline with Greg, who was threatening to sue Greenpeace because his grandfather was going to leave all his money to Greenpeace instead of to him, so he was threatening to sue Greenpeace. That night, I think after that aired, 22,000 people searched, how do I leave my money and my will to Greenpeace? So it has we know that it has a huge effect, and we know that it can be really important in changing behaviour. And I think there's a real recognition, there has been a real recognition over the last 5 years of the power of TV and film to do that, and its importance in that role. And I didn't look at the clock, sorry, so I might have been waffling on. But yeah, so, and we have, so in the UK, all productions are mandated to go through our certification process, and as part of that we do collect climate content data, and we're also, and there's also a lot of film organisations now that mandate the same, so there's definitely an interest specifically within film to move into the same space as well. So I think there's just a real recognition of the importance. There's an engagement. There's a much better engagement, I think, with the broadcasters and streamers and program makers and creatives to tell these stories. And I think just a recognition of the opportunity that it can offer as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Cheers. Too much of a round of applause. Yeah. Do you know what? I'm just wondering, I mean, for anyone who is involved in fundraising within the charity sector, so that's a legitimate strategy, isn't it? Just be mistreated on TV by a really unpleasant actor, a role, and then suddenly,
They've used it quite a lot in their campaigning since.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, Lucy, we'll move on to you. Can you talk a little bit about, why you set up Climate Spring? What gaps and issues were you looking at? And I think more importantly, how's it going?
Yeah. I set up Climate Spring because, I've been working on climate change for a really long time in many different guises, but generally with the thread of how do we move the narrative on climate away from, 20 years ago, more than that, when I started working on climate change, it was really just about trying to explain this pretty complicated science to people, that it's a thing, you need to be worried about it, and we can do something about it. And it was really about avoiding kind of future impacts. It was quite abstract, it was quite technical. And the climate community did that job of communicating the problem. We're well beyond that point of needing to really keep talking about the problem, because unfortunately it's here now, it's lived experience, it's front page news. And we know from all the evidence that everybody gets fundamentally there's something really scary happening with our natural environment, with pollution levels. And you don't really actually need to understand the science to know something really scary is happening. We're running out of time. But we've not managed to explain what it is we're supposed to do to navigate out of this crisis. And the fossil fuel industry has known this for a really long time. They've known that really to win, you need to play this as a culture war, and you need to play it as a narrative strategy. And what that means is not just lots of stories about climate, but a narrative strategy, is what our culture says about who we are, about how we relate to each other, what we value, what is important, And as we've heard, film and TV have an outsized impact in that space. Our collective culture says a lot about who we are. And I think I was starting to feel that our culture was reflecting perhaps the psyche of the public, which is, this is really scary, lots of dystopia, lots of apocalypse. And then the natural reaction to that is want to put your finger in your ears and avoid it with entertainment, or just dealing with the day-to-day, trying to get by. And so I set up Climate Spring really as sort of trying to address that problem by working with some of the best creatives in film and TV to try and shift that narrative away from a sense of hopelessness and doom and gloom and a sense of the lack of agency that Ainsley talked about, to really try and tell stories about how it is we can come together as a society, what that looks like. And it's not just, hope versus doom. It's really about the story of the transformation that we need to go through as a society. So that's why I set up Climate Spring, and I did that with some fantastic people from the film and TV industry, really with a focus on trying to be sort of the behind-the-scenes support to try and, find the stories and the teams that could help move that agenda forward. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And Chi, if I could read to you as well.
Sure. So I'm lucky enough. I work with Climate Spring. We have a project together called Boy in the Tower, which I hope is all those things that you talk about, which is that tells a realistic, a lived experience, but something also very hopeful. I think one of the really unique things about it is actually, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it again later, is the narrative that's at the heart of Boy in the Tower is how a whole community has to come together to actually tackle this big problem. It's not a single hero, it's not a slam dunk. It's about people coming together, and it's a process of healing. It's actually a process of a great deal of positivity. So yes, it's scary, but it's also these things as well. But the thing I wanted to talk about in regard to the question was actually about another project that David mentioned, which is called Promise. As a filmmaker, often when you're working on, say, a feature film or a TV series, although you're a filmmaker, maybe you're the chief creator, you don't actually end up having a great deal of, come back to your theme, of power and control over a lot of things. There's a lot of personalities that need to be negotiated with, funders, development execs, so on, the whole creative process as well. But with The Promise, I knew this was going to be very different because firstly, The Promise is a short film. And with a short film, you have actually a great deal more freedom. You can control a lot more elements of, A, what you're going to make, how you're going to make it, and how you're going to get it to audiences. So I suppose the bit I wanted to talk about was The Promise was something really special to me because I was able, and related to the question, which I don't think you said, David, but it was about, how do you create stories that are greener and fairer? With the Promise, I could, in an entirely 360 way, create something and roll it out that was greener and fairer in every respect. So the story is about rewilding. So how we made that, the process and means of production, we were able to make that entirely remotely. So our carbon footprint was really, really small. In terms of the people that we invited on, we made sure that everybody who was part of that, it was incredibly an inclusive team that came together to do that. And then what often happens in film and TV is the producer that might have, say, a great deal of control over the production bits suddenly loses control in the modes of distribution. But with the short film, I could choose where it went out. So I was very lucky. The film got invited to attend Climate Story Lab, and I learned many great things there. One of those things that kind of harkens to what you were talking about earlier, which is firstly, with climate emergency, it's not going to take one thing. It's going to take a million things. It's going to take, the whole global community to come and kind of fix this. And so we need everyone doing their bit, what they have access to, and everything. So I was able to then build the whole kind of value chain of the film from how we developed it, how we made it, the people we chose to work with, and then in how we rolled it out, we made sure everybody that represented the project was, it was very inclusive. We prioritized marginalized people. We even undertook a school impact campaign, which meant that, on launch day, we showed the film in 1,500 schools all over the country, and we did special outreach campaigns to reach particularly disadvantaged areas. So there were lots of things we could do because we had control over everything. And I think this 360 way of working really empowered that whole process of being able to make something kind of greener and fairer. But it's actually much harder to do on a far bigger scale, I think, on a far more commercial scale, because when if you make a feature film, you make a TV show, you sell it to a channel, you sell it to a distributor, off it goes. You don't get to have that same amount of control. You don't get to have those same choices. But you know, the promise to me was this like kind of dream of how you can actually practice like creatively the whole process and make it very inclusive, make it very green, make it very fair. But I've yet to be able to succeed on doing that on a larger scale.
Great, thank you, fantastic. It's really interesting as you talk about the pockets where change can happen. I think that's something that we don't see just within the film and TV's relationship to climate change, but I think within broader sectors, I think making change happen at a more localized level is sometimes very easy. Trying to link that up into bigger scales, and particularly, this what we often call the kind of meso level. So at the macro level, you've kind of got the geopolitics stuff, and the micro level, you have smaller projects, but finding things that can operate in the middle that start to scale change, I think can be really, really challenging. And I wonder on that, there's a couple of questions I kind of love to get through, but I think one of them, I wouldn't mind starting with some of the things that we think are tricky at the moment. Just building on what you're saying, Chi, because I think, so in the transition, we often talk about sectors that are hard to abate. So things like construction, where actually getting emissions down in those kinds of sectors is really tough. And I'm interested from a film and TV perspective, what are the things that are hard to shake? When we look at climate change and the industry's response to it, what are the challenges that are hard to shake? Let's go first. Anyone who is yeah, go for it.
I mean, you might want to sort of that. I mean, reducing the carbon footprint is no doubt difficult, and maybe you might speak to that. But I think for me, what's really hard to shift is these ingrained, kind of consumed narratives that we don't even know that we're repeating. I mean, so for example, the fossil fuel industry has played a blinder for a very long time of convincing everybody that, the fossil fuel is the backbone of the economy and take it away and everything crumbles. And that myth is perpetuated in our culture by storytellers without even realizing it. So I think one of the hardest things is the extent in which we're so hardwired we don't realize it. Our narratives have been so captured that seeing that is really hard to see, I think. So I think maybe that's a very difficult thing to unblock. And the flip side to that is, and kind of to respond to your question, there is huge interest in the industry, in the screen industry, to tackle that. I think there is huge talent interest. There are a huge number of producers, writers, agents, actors who want to tackle that and really confront the climate crisis face on in their storytelling. But how to do that when we also don't, as a society, and perhaps even the climate community as well, doesn't spend so much time talking in inspiring kind of layman's terms about what would that look like? What would it look like if we really were to divest in every sense from the fossil fuel industry? How do we conjure that up? And that's a real, we found at Climate Spring, that's a real block for a lot of people, is because there's no reference points to a lot of people to start to inspire that. What does it look like? What would a sustainable future look like? And for me, that's one of the biggest blocks, but that's not on the carbon footprint side. I don't know if you might want to say something on that.
I was just going to pick up on that, actually. So with, I think a lot of, so we do collect data about the climate stories that are in there at the middle of production, and a lot of what we're seeing is certain tropes, I guess, recycling, cycling, driving an EV car, and I think there is something to be said for looking deeper into the stories and deeper into the science, I guess. And I've been told, and I think you've mentioned it before as well, that a lot of creators are slightly nervous about addressing climate science because they don't want to get it wrong and they don't want to be cancelled. But it's a tricky thing to navigate, and it is complicated, and actually the science is very intricate depending on the area that you're looking at. So I think there is maybe it's an education program, or not something sexier than that, but that it's about linking up scientists with writers or something along that lines, because I do think there's certain tropes that are being told a lot, which is great. You know, it's great to have loads of solar panels and people cycling, and but there's more to tell, and there's a lot more to say, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, just looking at you, Fenty and Chi, like I'm interested as creatives who have very much stepped into engaging with climate change. Like how easy did you find that? What kind of support helped you on that journey, or is it something that was entirely sort of self-driven?
I wanted to take that question on, but also the last question, because I think they're probably interconnected. So much of climate change is like PR strategy. Really, it's like it's the work that I've been educated on from Lucy that has been done by the fossil fuel industry for the last, I don't know, 60, 70 years about fundamental beliefs we have about wealth, status, oil, and and how we exist, and all the lies we're told by societies, governments about everything that we have and own. Like, you know, so much of the UK's wealth is based on colonialism, and that isn't part of these conversations. And I think that climate and colonialism are the same things. The people that are the most affected in the world are the people who have emitted the least. That is not a conversation that happens when you talk to the average person about like climate change. Climate justice is at the heart of climate change, and what's so difficult about that is that we live in a structure where a lot of people do not have the mental capacity to think beyond their own experience. And that limits the depth of the conversation you have, because it becomes a very real psychological conversation about connection. It becomes something that makes someone question things about themselves, which, if not done properly, can make them reject you very easily. For example, talking to my mother about anything that is against what she believes. Any bloody thing. So I don't have, even someone who's read as much books as I have and has done as much work as I don't have the patience to deal with my mother's rejection of the truth. And that's someone I love, right? So imagine you're talking to someone who doesn't know anything about it. There are so many depths and layers to meeting someone on a level to talk about what this thing really is, and that's so hard. So to go back to the question you're asking me is how do I get involved with it? Because I saw that was an issue, and I wanted to find an answer. And what I realized is that radical honesty is so fucking useful. I cannot suggest it highly enough. The risk you take in sharing with someone provides an equal ground for both of you to grow. It just does. And so a lot of the work that I've had to create has been about my experiences with my family, has been about my experiences in the climate space, has been about my experiences as a black man in the UK, because that's the truth, that's my lived experience, that's something I can speak from. And it is never ever about, you are not good enough, you are not doing enough, you haven't engaged with it, this is your fault. It is about, look at how we've both been fucked. And look at the journey that I've had to go on because of that fuckery. Share in that with me, as opposed to you have to do this because you haven't done it. And that exists in storytelling. That exists in the people we platform, how we make the work, who gets to be behind the camera, all of these things that, honestly, fucking inclusion works, dude, sorry. But all these things, when you bring in people with those experiences, that comes naturally in making the work, and suddenly you're making really dynamic, really interesting, really depth and textured work that talks about climate justice in the same way that we talk about inflation in ways that my mum might understand, or my sibling, which is like, Freddos are more expensive now. That's a way I can communicate inflation, very, very simply, which isn't about blaming. And with mum, it's like, plantain is more expensive. And that is because of climate change. And that's how we engage in that conversation, just meeting people on a level. So I came through wanting to be part of that. I learned that you have to meet people where they're at, not where you want them to be. I learned that if I'm honest with all the things I struggle with, all the things I get wrong, that I'm able to talk to more people than if I'm signposting what I'm getting right. And I also learnt that giving voice to people that don't have voices educates me way more than me telling them what they should be doing.
I don't think I can top that. That's really great.
It's not fair being on stage with an
I
actor,
know.
is it? Like,
Okay, I'll talk about one thing. So I was very lucky. A couple of years ago, I got to attend a climate impact lab in Cannes. And I kind of felt at that point in my kind of creative practice, I was probably plateauing a great deal in terms of, you know, dealing with sustainability, like kind of leveling up. And I got to meet some sustainability managers that are based in Italy. And what they do is they work with you actually at the very beginning of a project. They work with you at development. They look at the script. They might have something to say about it narratively. They might have ideas about actually like the means of how you're going to make that, how you can make that kind of more greenly and things like that. And they work with you across the entire thing. And it just felt like it was the right level up of doing something really cohesive, doing something really kind of integrated, doing something that was actually really meaningful. Sometimes I feel when I fill in the forms as a filmmaker to get certificates, I feel like I'm just trying to make myself feel good sometimes. I want to do something that's really kind of meaningful. And I started thinking about sustainability managers more and more. And I suppose the analog I've got, I don't know how many people work in the creative industry here, but I think sustainability managers are part of our future. I liken them to someone like an intimacy coordinator, which I would say 5-10 years ago didn't really exist. Filmmakers who probably didn't know enough about how to create intimate scenes were doing these things, and they're often doing these things, you know, without ethics, without questioning, and you know, and a lot of actors could be damaged in the process of that. Intimacy coordinators came on. They totally transformed that part of creative filmmaking. They made it safe, you know, for everybody. There was safeguarding and there were protections put in place. And when they came, everyone was like, that's a great idea. And producers like, thank God I don't have to think about that. There's so much kind of upside, and they've really kind of flourished, I feel, in the screen industry. And I feel sustainability managers can do as much. If you have a sustainability manager on a number of films and a number of TV shows working across at a very early stage, they can actually start the transformation, I believe, in the industry. If you think about one department alone, say lights, if you have these managers working across all these projects, they can actually start having real economic power in that conversation and getting kit houses to change the lights they can make available. And if there's enough of that going on, you'll see a transformation across all of that. Suddenly, we can actually have films and TV shows that are doing that, and it's affordable. Often for the small producer working in this, I'm a small producer, you know, you go with what you can get, what you can afford, what you can get for free, what you can blag. But what we need to do is kind of create a far bigger transformation of all the kind of green things that we can have access to. And I think sustainability managers are going to be key to that. And I think hopefully that it's going to be mainstreamed. At the moment, you only tend to have them on very big productions that can afford them, but we need them everywhere. And I think, like, you know, going back to the question, like, you know, what are these very challenging spaces? Well, there's a lot of challenging spaces because it feels like a lot of time there's not a great deal of control about how to create that transformation. So I feel the bargaining power sustainability manager can bring can be really transformative.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm very struck by both you and Fenty sort of speaking about very practical, you know, whether it's the Green Rider or really practical, almost like procedures and rules of the game that allow you to drive through those kinds of changes. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll throw it out to the room. One of the, I think, triggers for the House deciding to put on the C event was, I think, like many people, watching with kind of interest and some surprise as Mr. Bates and the Post Office that came out earlier this year, and seeing a moment of a film and TV production sort of really driving a dramatic shift in the world at large. And I guess I'd like to hear a little bit from the group, like in the context of climate change, you know, what are the opportunities for film and TV to create the conditions for that kind of big shift? And I think also in the context of being at an institution that's very interested in policies and politics and government, you know, what might film and TV need from our side of the table to help enable those kinds of big moments? Sorry, big question, right? How are we going to save the world with one big show? It's like, you know, there's the...
I mean, I think with Mr. Bates and the Post Office, it wasn't just that drama. It obviously had it was incredible, and Little Gem did an amazing job creating it. But I just mean that it had a build. There was more stuff that came before it, and I do think that kind of everything that we're doing and hopefully are going to do will help the big dial-changing dramas or stories that are going to help change policy. But crucially, in helping with storytelling, I think it's about the humanity of it. It's about the human effect, and I think that's why it was such a powerful drama, and it sort of made people start listening overnight. Is because it just had so much humanity to it, and it just felt so genuine. And I think that's something that we can take into storytelling, which I know we're really good at, but particularly with climate storytelling, I think it's important to remember the human aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing example of what we're trying to do. So I think what was so powerful about it is, as you said, you know, that has been a long-running campaign for a really long time, endless podcasts and documentaries and campaigns. And obviously why it hit through is that it was a TV drama being watched by people who wouldn't necessarily watch a documentary or listen to a podcast about an issue. You know, it was watched by regular people in their living rooms, you know, on a rainy January evening, and it tapped into that sense of outrage, that sense of pure injustice, and that is something we've lacked, I think, in climate change. We feel the fear of what's happening with the climate, but the outrage of who's responsible for that and why we are where we are. Most people do not get. In fact, most people get the opposite. They're made to feel it's their fault. They should feel guilty about it. They don't recycle enough. You know, and actually people should feel mad and outraged at the extent at which we've been put in this situation deliberately over many, many decades and are continuing to be driven down a fossil fuel path when all the alternatives are there and readily available. And so we're working on a number of stories that we kind of call our justice stories, that tell stories of accountability, normal people holding governments and fossil fuel industries and all the enablers to account, and tell the extraordinary stories of why we are where we are, which, you know, as someone who's worked in climate for such a long time, it still amazes me that has not been communicated, that we've not managed to tell that story. And I think it's because we work in facts so much and we haven't told stories, people's stories. And then the other, if I may, is and there's this sort of outrage that you're going to get from the Post Office drama, which created a political pressure, right, to do something about that problem. It was really hard for government not to respond to that, and we need that in climate. We need all governments to feel they are not just being given a mandate, they're being pressured to do something about accountability and justice. And then similarly, you know, culture creates a mandate in more subtle ways, right? Culture creates the mandate for what is socially acceptable, what is responsible, what do we consider okay as a society? And I think culture can do that in lots of ways. It can show, and again, it creates that mandate, that space for politicians to then feel emboldened and brave that they can implement a policy and the public are not going to revolt. And that's what we've really been missing, because at the moment, you know, we've been experiencing the opposite, haven't we? We've been experiencing any kind of policy intervention, getting a culture backlash, because that mandate hasn't been built, that mandate of normal people buying into the transition that's underway. So those are the ways I think we're going to hopefully start to see culture intersecting with policy.
Thank you.
I just go back to what I said earlier, which is I think, firstly, there's never going to be one show that does it. We need a plenitude of kind of climate narratives, and we can't have a hypocrisy about how those things are made. So we have to, the things that we choose to make and how we choose to make them, and we need a lot of them, and everybody in every little corner they have to be doing their bit. And I really think it's about, you know, everyone kind of coming together, which is, again, one of the things that makes it feel so hard, that you need kind of everyone's kind of buy-in. But I think we can only get there really with Plentitude. Like, I've really come away from believing there's one thing that's going to rescue us. Like, it's got to be everything.
Fancy any comments?
Yeah, I think I really agree with everyone on the panel. I also think there's a couple of steps further away in terms of like climate is so intermingled intrinsically with justice. Justice to be every day, and I think one of the things that have come up with all the answers is like representation of everyday people, like representation of everyday people so that they can buy into the idea that this thing is important. People need to see themselves in order to care. And just the industry is so exclusive. It's so unbelievably exclusive that the fact that I'm on this panel right now is like a fucking miracle. Genuinely, that I've been very lucky to shoot a lot of stuff and do a lot of stuff and continue to go in that way. But I'm one of very few people. So when we talk about like who gets to write those stories, who gets to be in the room, who gets that funding, like the money's got to go to the mid-tier makers, the workshops at school, the people coming up to explore that so they can actually make like their community short film into a major film or like a series, or like there are so many structural issues that if solved could burst the imaginations of the creative industries. It's funny, it's like when you tell a child like a big political issue, and they go, well, why don't you just do that? And everyone goes, well, you know, because it's so complicated. And it's like, well, that's bad, so don't do it. And you're like, well, yeah. and it is true, you get the right people in the right room, you open those minds, you introduce those people, and you end up with incredible projects, you end up with new ideas. And I think what we're all trying to do is bring up those people. So in terms of like Chatham House, what they can do is they can give us money to like fund those ideas, to bring those people in the room. It is about culture change as much as it is about climate change. And I think that will really, really fund, pun intended, the ideas bank of what we're looking for, basically.
Great, thank you. And thinking about the right people in the right room, folks, I think it's probably about time to turn to you. So we're going to do Q&A. I'm going to take probably 3 questions, and then panel, we can sort of respond to different bits of it. There are roving mics. For your question, if you could just do name, organisation you come from, if relevant, and questions. Please, no comments masquerading as questions. Let's get into questions. So first, the lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Anita Punwani, a risk professional. To what extent are you focused on the youth and the messaging, and should it differ from the conventional mainstream communication around the climate crisis in terms of what specific agency and power they have, which perhaps differs from the decision makers and those in positions to be able to make change at the moment?
Thank you very much. And yep, gentleman here at the front on the right-hand side, please.
Richard Hill, Chatham House member. We're not seeing any stories of climate injustice actually coming through. Many, many years ago, we saw stuff about racial injustice coming through as stories. We're not seeing them. What can be done to get that story out and get it told? Things like a Just Stop Oil, where people can't defend themselves properly in court, things like that. It's just not getting said.
Great, thank you. And we'll take one from this side, the lady here in the middle.
Thank you, Isabella. I work for Accounting for Sustainability, so it's a charity. And I have a slightly different challenge where I'm always trying to find the best ways to communicate how people can get more involved with different endeavours and more involved and engaged to drive change within their own organisations. And that is my narrative challenge, where it's kind of really trying to pull people into the little changes that they can make every single day. And part of the reason why I'm here is to hopefully learn some of these narrative tips to apply those to my work. So anything from that point of view would be really helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so focus on youth messaging, climate injustice, how do we get stories out, and narrative tips to get people involved in change. Who'd like to jump in?
I can say something about maybe youth. So The Promise was based on a kid's book, and it's very much like a film for young families. And it was the first time I probably made something for a younger audience. And one of the great surprises was actually, and I've done a lot of films, I've done a lot of short films as well, and tried to like roll out a lot of short films to audiences, was there was a massive appetite actually for stories that spoke to young people, to families with young children. And I got a real sense that there was a real lack of, someone creating stories that could speak to them, that was first honest, wasn't going to sugarcoat it. The Promise is a dystopian, like, kind of future cli-fi. But at the same time, it had a hopeful message, but it was driven by, like, that someone could create change, that you can make transformation. And it was a story about a character who, like, came from shame and how they were able to, like, overcome that. And it was like it was a real eye-opener for me to see how audiences, young people responded to that. And it was really that confidence that kind of made me go, I think The Boy in the Tower could be something that's really special, because it's again, that's something that centers a young black kid who's about 10, who is, in like, living in the last tower that's standing in London in a time of climate emergency. And it's what gets him through that, and it's community gets him through that. So I can't quite remember the full question, but my feeling is, like, stories that center and platform young people, especially ones from marginalized backgrounds, that talk honestly, that but also are empowering, there is a hunger and appetite for, and I found that all the way around the world. It was by far the most successful short film that I kind of put out there,
I could say something about my particular bugbear with kids and engagement is either their one little thing they can do, switch the lights off. That's a real pet hate. I know, and I mean this because I think there's a real disingenuousness when you tell a young person that, particularly I'm thinking kind of young adults or teens or anyone kind of perhaps over the age of 10, is tuned into the climate crisis, are deeply anxious and worried about the climate crisis. And then to tell them they can switch their lights off and everything's going to be fine is just a huge, creating a huge disconnect. It's dishonest, but it's not speaking to where they are, the anxiety that they're feeling, the sense of worry about their future. There's a quite terrifying statistic about the fact that 75% of young people globally feel hopeless about their future, feel deeply depressed and anxious. And it's no wonder, is it? I mean, it's not just the climate crisis. But so I think, to answer the question, I think it's really important we give them something to fight for. And part of that could be love of nature and love of the planet that we're in. And, but at the same time, we need to kind of understand that a lot of young people have deep anxiety, and speaking to that, and stories that reflect that, I think, can be hugely empowering.
There's that fantastic quote by Amitav Ghosh, which is like, in times to come, basically, I'm paraphrasing really badly, apologies, when people look at what have happened and how we got here, they might as well blame the artist too, for isn't it the artist's job to show them, to help them imagine the future? So when you talk about, like, give them something to hope for, give them something to fight for, like, the first step of that kind of change, of that transformation, becoming active in that conversation, is actually imagining the world that can be greener and fairer at the end of the day.
Right, because we're in a transformation at the moment, and what is that going to yield? I mean, it's not all going to be brilliant, it's not all going to be a utopia, but there is going to be change. And kids' TV is where you can have some fun with exploring that. You can have a bit of sense of adventure. And then to answer the question about why are we not seeing more of these stories on screen, I think partly because it takes such a long time, doesn't it? So, I mean, you'll know how long it takes for an idea to go from a kernel of an idea to reaching on screen. I mean, it's a slow process. Climate Spring, we're trying to speed that up, and we have about 40 projects now that are, in development. So that's, for a small organisation, that's a little bit, but that's quite a lot. So I can't tell you when they're all going to hit the screen, but we're working on it being as soon as possible. But the tide is turning. There is an appetite, but the wheels do turn slowly in the industry. Yeah.
But you need support for those projects at every stage.
Yes.
This is the problem of the value chain, is they're all quite discrete.
Yeah.
So Climate Spring is wonderful. I'm so glad it exists. But we need, for any film to come, to get onto your TV, to be on your cinema screens, requires probably it to find over 1,000 champions along the way. It's one of the things that makes it so hard to succeed.
Well, just to pick up on the children's TV, or children's stories, so we know that they're really worried about climate change. As you've said, there's loads of, The Lancet recently did a report as well with quite terrifying statistics about how concerned they are. And climate change was the word of the year for 2023 for children, just in front of war and then the coronation. So we know they're really engaged, and they want positive stories. So they want positive solution stories and not just sort of worrying, because they are worried about it and they want to know what to do with it. So I think actually we could probably learn quite a lot from children's TV. From our data, children's TV is one of the larger areas that have climate content storytelling within it. But you're right, it needs to have other stories and other ideas within it to help kids navigate it, I think.
I know there's loads of other questions, so I'll just keep on to others. But I think with children's TV, it's more of a more fundamental commentary about being British. We're sort of we're not incapable, but we find it very difficult to move through emotions. And something about the West, about a real focus on positivity and happiness with the neglect of the importance of everything else. Children aren't stupid. They really aren't. And so they need to move through grief just the same way we need to move through grief. And we haven't got anyone to guide us through this sort of existential dread. And so we're sort of ill-equipped to guide them, I'd say, in other points, which becomes so difficult when you're talking to children, people who are supposed to look after and protect and make sure we're safe with everything. But grief is good. Grief is good, sad is good, angry is good. The sense of injustice is good. It's what moves us forward. The problem is when we get stuck. When we get stuck in those emotions without being able to move forward, that's where we get frustrated. And that's where it goes, okay, let's put my ears in and let's focus on being positive and happy. But as we all know, all of that stuff just backs up. It just stays there and it comes out in other ways. We know that. So actually, the question around children's TV and moving through for climate change and climate injustice is actually about moving through emotion. It's about moving to the depths of despair, which we all experience, children as well, and guiding through it so they have the tools, as well as us, to continue to move through it, because it's cyclical. We're always going to have to do it. And the harder things get in the world that we live in, the more we're going to have to be equipped to move through those things and not get stuck. So my bugbear is that there isn't enough conversation around talking around very difficult emotions and states of being. And I think the more we do it, the easier we'll find storytelling around climate action and climate being, because joy exists beyond fear and beyond pain and with pain, not just against it and instead of. And then we had a question here, just a comment that came straight after about why don't we see more injustice in climate stories. I totally agree, and it was really interesting you were talking about we were seeing a lot of racial injustice but not climate injustice. They're sort of the same thing. And the challenge is the connection between them. The challenge is to be all injustice is intersectional. And what we're seeing is another marginalized group made to take the brunt of something another group is incapable of dealing with. And that is a narrative that repeats itself again and again and again. LGBTQ rights, as we see with trans issues at the minute, or we're talking about racial injustice, or we're talking about sexism. Like it is just the same narrative with the same people upholding the same ideals so that they get the power and that we don't. So actually the imaginative work of what we do is the connection between all of those things. Because what we should have seen is more people in those spheres represented being like, okay, well, if we're talking about racial injustice, why are we here in the first place? Why were we brought to this country? Why are we sending money back home? Why? Because they're hit with floods. Why does that happen? Because of climate change. Why does that happen? Because of the history of colonialism in this country and how we extract palm oil and oil from other countries. Like all of these narratives are the same fucking thing. So in the question of like, why don't we see more climate injustice? It's like climate injustice should be included in all the other stories of injustice that we see. There are reasons people steal from shops because they can't afford food. Why is the food so expensive? Because it's harder to grow. Why is it harder to grow? You already know. Do you know what I mean? So that is, I think, part of that question. And again, it's about getting the people with the knowledge to make those connections in the writers' rooms and pitching those things and making it accessible for everyone to buy into was the thing that I thought immediately when you said that.
Great. Thank you very much. And I think with that, we're going to draw the panel discussion to a close. So please, can I ask you to join with me? And also, I want to say a quick thank you to the AV team at Chatham House, and also the lady hiding at the back, who is Ellie, who has been the kind of driving force of today's event. Ellie, thank you very much. Okay, we are now at the promised moment of beer and popcorn. For those of you who do want to just sit upstairs, have a chat and enjoy that, that's great. I think when we researched this event and were preparing for it, there were so many people that we were speaking to and so many ideas that we felt could be explored in that we didn't want to stop it just at the chaired discussion. So for those of you who are either interested in pursuing topics or hate kind of unstructured networking, this is a bit for you. When we go upstairs, there are going to be 3 areas that we're going to call 3 conversation corners. Each of those is going to have a particular topic, and you'll hear a bit more about them in a moment. And really, we encourage you to kind of drift over to each of those corners to hear some of the, I guess, a conversation hosted by either researchers from Chatham House or researchers from our network on particular issues. It's not formal. You're not committing to being there for the next hour and a half. So go up, say hi, have a chat, drift on whenever you feel free. It's about 6:15 at the moment, so I'd say that there's sort of drinks and popcorn bits until about 7:45. With that, I'm going to introduce our 3 conversation corner holders. Ruth, you look like you're going to be our first. Yep, go for it. Ruth, what's your pitch? Very good.
Hi, everybody. That was such an amazing discussion. I'm really excited to continue the conversation upstairs. So the question in my corner will be, how can movies pick up the slack of engaging the public on climate change, and what happens when they do? And when I say slack, what I'm talking about is the fact that under the UNFCCC, governments across the world have committed to inform and engage the public on climate change and to enable them to be part of an adequate response. That's not happening. So when we talk about informing and engaging, you were saying the science, there's more to tell on that. Catherine was also talking about TV affecting behaviour change. That's something else that could be done. Fenty, you were talking about empowering people and normalising those adequate responses. So beyond the solar and cycling, like what is really adequate from the general public? And then what are the potential pitfalls of this? Are incentives aligned between industry and governments? And how might, where have my words gone? How might governments and industry work more closely together on this in the future? And is that even an answer? So I'll see you in my corner. I've got a picture from the movie Don't Look Up if you struggle to find me.
Great. Thank you very much, Ruth. Chris, you want to go on? Who's going?
So the question that will be talked about in my corner is about the increasing impacts of climate change and how we are going to respond to that in the stories that we're telling about climate change. So one knee-jerk reaction to all of those bad things that are starting to happen more and more on climate change would be to heap on the doom and gloom, to start making ever worse rhetoric, more code red for humanity, more highway to climate hell type of messaging about this. From a psychological point of view, that would be entirely the wrong response. If you want to find out why that is, come and talk to me. I'm a neuroscientist by background. Equally bad would be to act as if nothing was happening and to tell just stories of a rosy future that we would be attaining without any challenge, without any problem at all. So what's the thing that sits in between that? It's stories of, with gritted teeth and much determinism, working through all of these bad situations that we're dealing with and overcoming some of these challenges and ending up in a better place. So how do we tell those stories? Where do we find them? At which level do we tell them? That's going to be the point of discussion in our little corner. And I'll be joined by my colleague Daniel there, and so there'll be two of us to talk with you about that.
Great. Thank you very much. Alice and Stefan.
Hi, everybody. My name's Alice Sakraida, and I work with a fund called the Power of Pop Fund, which is housed at Comic Relief. It's a pooled fund, so we've managed to raise over 2 million to invest in charities and organisations that are working at the intersection of race and migration and culture. And we found that all of the organisations that we're investing in work on climate. It's, as Fenty was saying, all injustice is intersectional, and we're seeing that all of the time with the organisations that we're seeking to fund. So our question is, how can movies engage more effectively at the intersection of race, migration, and climate? I'm going to pass to Stefan.
Hi, I'm joining my colleague Alice. I'm Stefan Lee. I am one of the council members of the Power of Pop Fund, so we are an advisory board that's been created to help guide the future of this fund and its investment strategy. So again, the question in our corner is climate, race, migration. Are they interrelated? The answer is emphatically yes. So the conversation is, what do we do about it in film and TV? How do we talk about that? Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of the chair talk. Our lovely, knowledgeable, friendly folks will be in their various conversation corners. I hope you've enjoyed the evening so far, and I hope you enjoy what is to come. And can I ask you in joining me in a final round of applause for everyone who's spoken this evening.